We got a big time problem for 0 Kilo Whiskey. We're out of fuel.
Well, yeah, running out of fuel is a pretty big problem. However, it's not number one on my list of my number one fears that I have when I'm flying. That still goes with fire. Having a fire is something that's uncontrollable. Your fuel, unless you have a massive fuel leak, your fuel is something that the pilots can control. It should never be that type of situation where you run out of fuel unless you're talking about something like an abnormal fuel leak or something like that that happens. So fire's still number one. Running out of fuel, I mean, I wouldn't like that. That's obviously a concern that I have. But number two is not having snacks on board. All right, watch what happens.
Kind of 220 Kilo Whiskey, we're going around and we're minimum fuel this time around.
0 Kilo Whiskey, Roger, you should be with tower.
They told us to go around and contact you.
Roger.
There's something that he said here that's really important, and that's about what his fuel situation is. There's kind of four rough categories that you'll be in with your fuel while you're out flying. First, you have your normal operations. That means you'd have enough fuel to fly to your airport that you're intended to go to, your destination, and then from there fly to a backup airport and then hold at that backup airport doing these oval patterns. Now, how much fuel you have as far as to hold over that backup airport, that is going to vary depending on the type of operations that you're doing. You have some domestic operations or international operations or airlines. Different countries will have different rules, but as a rough number, it would be to fly to that airport and spend 30 minutes to 60 minutes holding there. So it's basically enough to safely get to your backup airport and have plenty of time to come in and land. That is your normal operations. And then you have minimum fuel, which is where this guy's at when he says this.
We're minimum fuel this time around.
And minimum fuel is okay. What it means is basically that you can't have any delayed vectors or you can't have any unexpected delays. And so the controllers know, I can't mess around with this person. I need to get them in pretty quickly, but it's not an emergency state. I've declared minimum fuel. We were on a long flight and we didn't have an alternate, and weather and a bunch of situations led us to that. It wasn't a big deal, not any problem at all, but that just lets the controllers know, hey, we can't give this guy holding or make him wait or anything like that. That's minimum fuel. Next, you have Mayday fuel. That's a bigger problem. Again, it's going to be different for every airline and different countries, but essentially it means you're going to be getting into your destination airport with less than 30 minutes of fuel. And there are situations that you'll be minimum fuel and then you'll be Mayday fuel. It would go like this. Imagine you're coming into your planned destination airport and you let them know ahead of time your minimum fuel. But as you get close to that airport, something happens and the airport gets closed. Now, as you start heading to your backup alternate airport, let's say you were planned to have about 30 minutes of fuel once you got to that destination. If there were any vectors or anything where you're going to be less than 30 minutes of fuel when you get to that destination, you're now Mayday fuel. Typically, in my experience, the only time you're going to hear a Mayday fuel situation is an airport's closed for weather, snow, whatever, and they're holding for a long time and they miscalculate their fuel burn, or they didn't plan it out accordingly on their normal flight. Let's say you have a really long flight and the winds are very different from what you were planned. You might have a Mayday fuel in that situation. Or you just didn't properly plan your fuel burn while you were holding. That's another situation where you could have a Mayday fuel situation. It is very rare. Minimum fuel, I hear occasionally. It's not really common, but I do hear it and I've had it and it's not a big deal. Mayday fuel is definitely an attention grabber. And finally, you have this.
We're out of fuel.
Which is the audio that you heard at the beginning of this video. And that is the worst of all four categories. You're out of gas. Now, the pilot said that he had to do a go-around in the beginning. It sounds like the tower instructed him to do a go-around. So I'm guessing he was probably minimum fuel as he was coming into that airport. But when he did that go-around and he declared that they were min fuel now, that was letting the controllers know, hey, I'm tight on gas, so please get me back in quickly. That's how this whole thing started.
They told us to go around and contact you.
One of the big problems that you have when you do a go-around and you're low on fuel is that if you pitch your wings up too steep, you can have a situation where the area of the fuel tanks that are in your plane that is gathering the fuel for your engines, it can get uncovered. Meaning normally they're deep inside that fuel tank, so they're bringing gas in all the time or fuel in all the time. And what happens is when you pitch your wings really high as you're going on a go-around, which you can pitch too steep, and what will happen is those places that are sucking in all the fuel, they get uncovered from the fuel because the wing tanks have basically pushed all the gas to the back. So imagine this is a place where the fuel is getting sucked in, and then when the plane pitches up, all this fuel goes to the back of the wing, leaving this exposed, causing your engines to run out of fuel. So a concern that a lot of pilots have when they're on a low fuel situation like this is something that I've talked about when we had our min fuel situation is, in the event we have to do a go around, we're going to try to keep the pitch angle as shallow as possible. You still have to maintain the climb and do all the other requirements, but you don't want to let the nose go up too high, because you go too high, you run out of fuel, and now you have a much bigger situation. So you have to do sometimes a shallower climb when you do a go around, depending on the type of plane that you have. Watch what happens next.
November 0 Kilo Whiskey, turn left heading at 30, air correction 320, maintain 3000.
320, 3000, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
November 0 Kilo Whiskey, state your flight conditions.
BMC 0 Kilo Whiskey or minimum fuel.
Roger, do you think you'd be able to do a visual first that could be at 3 or lower?
Hey, affirmative, I can see you right now.
Okay, and I'll have inbound for you, Shroy. Fly heading 320 for now.
320 for now, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
If you don't understand the importance of what he said right here,
BMC 0 Kilo Whiskey or minimum fuel.
he's essentially saying that he's in visual conditions, that he can see the runway, that the alternative would be I'm IMC, meaning that he's in clouds and cannot see the runway. So he's saying, I'm BMC, I'm minimum fuel, like just a reminder, I'm low on gas over here, so I can see the runway. Sounds like, in hindsight, that he's telling controller, I can see the runway, like you can clear me, I will get in from here, but he's not saying that. He's just saying, I'm minimum fuel, can't do any undue vectors, and I can see the runway, so I don't need to go up any higher or get brought out really far. I'm fine. So that's what he's communicating to the controller, so the controller has an idea of what's going on with that pilot, but the pilot's not being clear about telling him his exact condition here. Watch what happens.
0 Kilo Whiskey, Mindy, also maintain 2,500.
2,500, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
United, or correction, King Air 0 Kilo Whiskey will be following the Embraer 170 at 4,000. They're 10 miles to the west inbound for 9 left.
Oh, okay, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
Thank you, November 0 Kilo Whiskey, turn left heading at 290.
290, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
November 0 Kilo Whiskey, the traffic for you to follow is 10 o'clock and 4 miles eastbound at 3,500 feet.
Inside 0 Kilo Whiskey.
November 0 Kilo Whiskey, follow the Embraer, cross the Big Turbulence, clear visual source lane 9 left.
Clear visual 9 left, 0 Kilo Whiskey.
0 Kilo Whiskey, verify you have the traffic set your 12 o'clock.
Inside 0 Kilo Whiskey.
Okay, it looks like you're turning inside of them. Cleared November 0 Kilo Whiskey, advise you turn right heading at 270, maintain 2,500.
We got him inside 0 Kilo Whiskey.
0 Kilo Whiskey, Roger. Is that your 2 o'clock and 2 miles eastbound at 2,700 feet?
The pilot sounds like he's now cutting inside of this inbound Embraer 170. And I think that he is doing that because he's anxious about his fuel, the amount of fuel that he has on board. So he's now cutting himself in tight. But what he's doing is he's limiting his options. He's turned inbound, and the controller is telling him where the traffic is and the distance that he is away. Listen to this.
0 Kilo Whiskey, Roger. Is that your 2 o'clock and 2 miles eastbound at 2,700 feet?
That's not a big distance to have. And the thing is you're going to need separation from that plane in order for that plane to safely land, clear the runway so you can get in there. If you come in too tight, you have a situation where they could get a resolution advisory causing them to go up or causing you to go down or whatever might happen. There might be that. And then both the planes get broken off from the approach, which adds extra time, and you don't have time for extra time when you're minimum fuel. So he's getting himself into a corner, and by turning in tight, he's limiting his options. Because if he gets in too tight behind that plane, he now has a problem where that plane doesn't clear the runway and he has to go around again. And when you're already min fuel, you definitely don't want to do a second go around. He keeps limiting his options. Watch this.
3659 ground frequency canceled for clearance, climb maintain of 4,000.
We got a big time problem for 0 Kilo Whiskey. We're out of fuel.
0 Kilo Whiskey, that traffic's moving out now. You can continue inbound and contact tower 1.
So I got both engines quit. 0 Kilo Whiskey. 0 Kilo Whiskey, we don't have any fuel.
Listen to what this pilot is saying, what this pilot is doing, and I think has realized this pilot has got himself into a bad situation. He breaks off that pilot that's doing the approach that was cleared for the approach, right? He breaks him off and tells him to climb and go away, so that way this pilot can get in because he knows that he's a minimum fuel and he can't really break that guy off. Now, it's a pilot's fault for getting himself in this situation, and it's really well done by this controller because what he's seeing is he's seeing ahead of what's about to happen. This guy's turning in tight, and that there's going to be a potential situation where this King Air, which is low on fuel, is not going to be able to get in and safely land because he's going to be so close behind that other traffic. So he breaks that traffic off, which honestly is kind of genius. I think in most cases, the controllers would just give them a heading to turn right and then line them back out. Obviously, everybody knowing what's happened, they would have said, oh, obviously you'd send that other plane up in the air, but in the real world, that's not something that all controllers are not going to be able to read into the situation as well as this controller did. Really, really smart. The problem is that this King Air, now that both engines are out of fuel, he turns into a glider, and he's only a few thousand feet over the ground, and that is not going to be enough, because what's going to happen now, in order to prevent his plane from essentially stalling and just flying straight into the ground, he's going to have to trade his altitude for airspeed and essentially pitch the nose of the plane down to keep a specific speed so he can keep his plane moving forward and find a place to go. So it's not like your engines stop and it's all over. There have been cases where airline planes are up at 30,000 feet and there's a situation where they lose both their engines, and that plane is still able to glide a long distance and make it to an airport. There have been cases of that. So it's not the end of the world, and a lot of times people are scared up at 30,000 feet, but when they're at like 2,000 feet, they're like, oh great, we're almost on the ground. The truth is that 2,000 feet, it's a lot more dangerous than 30,000 feet because you don't have any altitude to trade for speed. So if that guy had lost his engine above the airport, above O'Hare, which is where all this was taking place, if that had happened at 10,000 feet and he'd lost his engine, it wouldn't be a big deal. He could still coast his way into the airport, but at a couple thousand feet, without a bunch of speed, he's going to have a hard time making it anywhere. So that's the situation that he's put himself in. Really great job by the controller foreseeing what was about to happen, but it's obviously not going to end well for this guy.
Zero Kilo Whiskey, Roger, and the field is at your 11 o'clock in 4 miles.
I'm ready to land on the road.
Land on the road, you said?
Affirmative.
Zero Kilo Whiskey, Roger. There's a highway there. It's runway 83 is 12 o'clock in 2 miles. From Zero Kilo Whiskey, radar contact lost.
You can hear the stress level of the controller has now gone up a lot. However, he's doing a great job maintaining a pretty calm voice, but he says runway 83 when I think he meant highway or interstate 83 or whatever it was. Not a big deal, but you can see the stress level, how quickly that changes for them, because now they have to start working out a solution for the problem that this pilot has created for himself. He's trying to give him some additional things like highway over here, or possibly a park over on this area. And the pilot is now also going to be looking outside, looking for a field to land in. Would probably be the best, better than a highway in Chicago. I'm guessing this is the daytime. That's going to be full of cars. It's not going to be very good success there, but a field might be better. So he's looking around, and kind of the ironic thing is O'Hare, their code for the airport is ORD. It used to be an orchard. It used to be like Orchard Airport or something way back in the day, because I guess it used to be apple orchards up there. So it's kind of ironic. But he's probably going to be looking for some type of a field or something to land in. That, I think, is going to be the best case of success. But having a dual engine flame out due to fuel starvation, one of the other positives, if you want to call it like that, is no fuel in the plane probably means there's going to be no explosion when you land, or if you get knocked out or unconscious, the likelihood of there being a fuel leaking situation that causes a fire is also reduced. So that's maybe the only positive of this situation of running out of fuel, but he's going to now start scrambling, trying to find something. He's looking at a runway, or he's looking at a freeway. See, I just did what the controller was doing. He's looking at a freeway to land on, because that's what we're trained to do, to look for something like that. But in a case like this, with this type of a plane, if he could find a field, maybe his chances are going to be better than landing on a highway. Now, if we go back to the audio at the very beginning where the pilot checked in with this,
220 Kilo, we're going around and we're minimum fuel this time around.
Had that pilot checked in with, hey, we're on the missed Mayday, Mayday, Mayday fuel, and his call sign, had he done all that on that initial check-in, instead of letting other planes come in and land, they would have just said, okay, can you have the runway in sight? Okay, you're cleared any runway, and they would have stopped all the traffic. They would have broken off the traffic. They would have stopped all departures, and he would have had all of O'Hare, all of their different runways to land on. And my guess is he probably would have been okay, because he was clearly way less than 30 minutes of fuel on that mist. He was probably minimum fuel when he was coming in, and had he checked in there with minimum fuel on his initial approach, they probably would have left him some more spacing in there, or done something, given him a different runway or something in order to get him on the ground safely. And alternatively, if that pilot was looking at his fuel and going, man, I got 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and another plane didn't clear the runway, he has the option to not follow FAA guidelines and just say, hey, I deemed for the safety of flight, the most important thing, which is safety is number one, I always tell you that, I deemed that it was important that I land on this runway. He could have declared Mayday 100 feet off the ground when the controller told him to do a go around. He could have said, Mayday, 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 fuel, I'm landing. He could have said that and landed. And that would have saved the plane, and he would have had to stop and clear the runway, or he could have landed on a taxiway. He could have done almost anything, and it would have been better than the choice that he made, which was declaring the min fuel way too late. And at that min fuel point, it should have been a Mayday, Mayday, Mayday fuel, and then they would have given him the entire airport. The problem is that sometimes pilots are looking at their fuel here and they're thinking, I don't want to declare this Mayday because now I'm going to get a lot of judgment and a lot of paperwork for this situation. And what happens is they end up crashing their plane into the ground like this. Now, if you declare Mayday fuel because you improperly planned your fuel, the FAA is probably going to want to talk to you about that. You might have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and it's not going to be a big deal. It is going to be a lot better situation to declare that Mayday, fill out that paperwork, than have a crash on your record. Because if you declare a Mayday fuel situation and have to fill out some paperwork, you've declared an emergency, you can use that as a learning experience. Like when you go to airlines or you go to other jobs and they ask, hey, tell me about a stressful situation. You can tell them about the time that you did something, that you misproperly fuel planned, and how you rectified that situation. Me as an employer, if I'm interviewing a guy and he says, hey, this is what happened, and I didn't properly plan my fuel right, and I got close to the airport, I realized that I wasn't going to have enough fuel, I declared a Mayday fuel, I landed on the runway that there was another plane on there because I knew that if I went around, I wasn't going to have enough fuel to safely come back in and land. I would view that as good judgment, because what he did is he downplayed a situation by saying the min fuel, and that really led to this thing being a problem. And he just tried to downplay the bad thing, bad situation that he had put himself in. If you own up to the things the problem that you're in, everybody will help you out. If you try to cover it up, nobody knows. The controller doesn't know that he's about to run out of fuel. Otherwise, he would have done something completely different for this guy, not let anybody else in, given him all the runways, and it would have been fine, and there wouldn't even be a video of some guy sitting in a hotel room talking about how he would have done it differently, and that would be the end of it. Now, here's some of the pictures of the plane when it made it onto the ground, and surprisingly, the guy ended up living. He was injured, but he lived. And despite all the criticism and all the errors and all the things that he did, the pilot did something really, really well here that I think everybody can learn from. And that is that he didn't quit fighting. He got himself in a bad situation. He ran himself out of fuel. He didn't communicate properly. He did a lot of things wrong here, a lot of things. However, he didn't quit. A lot of pilots, what will happen is and people in general, they'll get themselves into a really bad situation and they'll just give up. And they just go like, I'm screwed. It doesn't look like that's what happened. This pilot said, I've really screwed myself now. And he looked for a safe place to land. And I'm guessing this field is what he deemed to be the safest option, which honestly, I would take that field over a runway. I said it again, over a highway. I would take a field as well, because it's going to probably give you less cars, less barriers, less things that could cause a big problem. And he lived after this. So he didn't quit fighting, and he fought to the end, and he was in the plane by himself. But if he was in there with other people, my guess is that everybody probably would have lived, which is really surprising. And again, on the plus side, you're out of fuel, so there's not going to be an explosion. So don't hesitate to declare a min fuel or a Mayday fuel. That's better than this. And if you do get yourself into a bad situation, wherever you're at in life, don't be a quitter, keep fighting. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.